Welcome to this explainer, everyone. Grab a seat and maybe a notepad, because today we are diving headfirst into a masterclass on dark fantasy world building. I'm going to be stepping into my literature professor persona for this one, because we are unpacking something incredibly complex and, honestly, pretty terrifying. We're looking at the 57th Goetic spirit, Os. But listen, we aren't looking at him as some typical roaring, clawed monster that heroes just hack to pieces with a broadsword. No. We're going to examine Os as a brilliant, chilling literary archetype for unstable identity and purest psychological horror. If you're a writer or a world builder out there looking to craft narratives where a character's actual sense of self is the literal battlefield, you are absolutely in the right place. So let's get right into it.
I want you to consider this chilling fragment from a forgotten manuscript. You are not what you remember. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. It's a perfect distillation of the soft terror we're going to be exploring today. You know, in your typical fantasy setting, horror is usually a beast actively trying to break down the door, right? The threat is purely physical. But with an archetype like Os, the horror is way more insidious. It's this creeping realization that memory, the very spine of the self, the dates, the names, the personal history that literally tells you who you are, has been quietly, seamlessly rewritten. Because think about it, without memory, a character isn't a person anymore. They're just a blank shape waiting around for instructions.
So here's our masterclass syllabus for today. First up, we'll look at the Leopard and the Scholar. Then we'll dive into when masks become reality. Third, bureaucracy and identity loss. Fourth, we'll go over some dark fantasy plot examples. And finally, we'll wrap up with a masterclass writing prompt. We're basically going to completely deconstruct Os's methodology, taking his symbolic mythology and turning it into direct, practical tools for your own writing.
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, the Leopard and the Scholar.
We really need to examine the dual forms that define this 57th Goetic spirit, because understanding how these forms interact is the absolute key to unlocking how this archetype operates inside a story. According to the traditional descriptions, Oaktrees first appears as a leopard, and then later he takes on human shape. And notice how perfectly this breaks down a central metaphor. The leopard is beautiful, it's predatory, and crucially, it is camouflaged. It represents an instinct that hides in the shadows, changing how it's perceived so it can hunt effectively. But here's the twist. When Oaktrees transforms into the Scholar, that predatory beast doesn't just disappear. Not at all. It simply becomes articulate. The exact same predatory danger of the wild leopard is now hiding right in plain sight behind the civilized academic brilliance of a human intellectual.
And that is absolutely crucial for your world building, because Ofei's true horror isn't raw savagery, it's elegance. It's the terrifying patience of an intelligence that offers definitions so perfectly crafted, so incredibly sound, that any resistance begins to feel, well, entirely irrational. It is the civilized use of savagery. You're dealing with an intellect that can explain literally anything, justify anything, and seamlessly rename any wound as a mere theory. Ofei doesn't force your character to change using brutal violence. He calmly, rationally explains to them why they were always this new thing to begin with.
Moving right along to Section 2, when masks become reality. This brings us directly to the core mechanism of Osais's power, which is belief. In your standard adventure fantasy, shapeshifting is usually just physical, right? A magical potion wears off after an hour, or a physical disguise gets ripped off in a fight. But Osais's brand of transformation relies 100% on belief. He isn't just tweaking your shape, he is actively indoctrinating your mind. The changed person doesn't just look altered on the outside, they fundamentally, down to their core, believe they are truly the thing they have become. The actor actually becomes the tyrant they were only supposed to be performing. The Scholar becomes the very theory she's trying to defend. The mask literally stops being removable because the skin underneath has fused completely to the wood.
If you look at this comparison between Os and other spirits in the Goetic family, it really highlights his unique brand of terror. Take Balaam, for instance. Balaam offers a frightening kind of invisibility, letting you become someone else so completely that the original person can't be found by enemies. Or look at Gremory, who reshapes things to grant hidden treasures and unspoken desires. But Os is on a whole different level of terrifying because the identity shift he causes is absolute.
The original self is completely and utterly forgotten. The altered person fundamentally believes the alteration is their true original self. There is absolutely no going back, because the very person who would even want to go back no longer exists inside their own mind.
Let's dive into Section 3, Bureaucracy and Identity Loss. So, where does a monster like this actually hunt in your story world? To build a setting around O's, you have to start treating identity as a fragile contract. And that contract is made up of 4 things: memory, recognition, language, and power. O's teaches us that if you alter a character's memory, or if you change how their peers recognize them, or even just restrict the language they are permitted to use, they can become someone entirely else without ever noticing the exact moment it happened. As writers, this is pure gold. If you target and tweak any of these 4 pillars in your setting, you are going to successfully erode the selfhood of your characters.
Which leads us to the ultimate question in any world touched by Olois. Who has the power to define what happened? Against Olois, the battlefield isn't some ruined, burning city, and the weapons sure aren't swords or shields. The battlefield is interpretation, and that makes bureaucratic settings absolutely perfect for exploring this kind of erasure. We are talking about high courts, sprawling, dusty archives, ancient libraries, university lecture halls, sacred temples. Imagine a predator crossing a polished marble floor without making a single sound. Or picture a classroom where every answer the students give is technically correct, but every student leaves the room slightly less human than they were when they walked in. That is the vibe we're going for.
All right, Section 4, Dark Fantasy Plot Examples. Let's ground all this abstract theory into some actual practice. The source material provides these brilliant storytelling scenarios that utilize Oz's domains: secret knowledge, liberal sciences, and identity distortion. These are practically custom-made for gothic or psychological horror genres. We've got the Academy of Borrowed Faces, the Trial of the Wrong Self, the Leopard in the Court, the Secret that Rewrites the Body, and the Beast Beneath the Degree. Now, I want to look really closely at those first 2, just to see exactly how they function mechanically in a story. So, first up is the Academy of Borrowed Faces. This plot completely weaponizes the concept of academic progression. Imagine this: a secret, highly elite school where students master the liberal sciences by actually borrowing the minds and physical appearances of the dead. It's all just academic practice until graduation, where they are forced to choose one permanent form to keep forever. Now, our protagonist decides to rebel and refuses this final pact. But instead of being expelled, they discover that the institution, their closest friends, and even the official historical records no longer remember their original body. Talk about a nightmare. It turns the mastery of knowledge into the literal, irreversible loss of the original self. The institution hasn't just educated this student, it has systematically edited their soul.
Next is the Trial of the Wrong Self, and this one brilliantly places Oz's horror squarely into a cold, completely unfeeling legal bureaucracy. A woman is accused of a heinous crime, but the crime was committed by someone wearing her exact face and possessing her exact mannerisms. Now here's where it gets truly terrifying. The evidence against her is absolutely flawless. The witnesses aren't lying. They are entirely sincere in their testimony. She isn't fighting a malicious lie cooked up by a villain. She is fighting a manufactured truth that the entirety of society simply accepts as fact. Her only defense in this incredibly unforgiving court is to prove a massive, terrifying philosophical concept that identity itself can be fabricated out of thin air. In this scenario, truth is entirely subjective. It's decided solely by whoever holds the bureaucratic power of definition. The gavel doesn't strike to punish her for a crime, it strikes to erase her from reality.
Which brings us to our final section, Masterclass Writing Prompt. I want you to apply OBCs to your own world. Let's distill everything we've talked about today into a practical 3-step exercise you can take straight to your desk right now. If you want to organically construct an OBC-style transformation in your story, follow this progression. Step 1. Establish the mask. Give your character a specific role, a disguise, or maybe a really prestigious title that they willingly take on for some kind of tactical advantage. Step 2. Shift the belief. This is the slow burn. Have your character's internal truth begin to slowly, almost unnoticeably, reorganize itself around that specific role.
The performance they are putting on just becomes a daily, unthinking habit. And finally, step 3, erase the original memory. Bring them to that chilling realization that they can no longer remember where their clever little invention ended and their actual historical biography began. Over the course of the story, they have moved seamlessly from being a willing participant to being a permanent, helpless captive of their own disguise.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative prompt to really explore in your own writing. As we've seen throughout this explainer today, Oprah's truth does not set you free. It absolutely doesn't. It simply gives your cage a much more accurate name. So think about your main character. Put them right in front of a mirror. When that mirror finally reflects a total unrecognizable stranger back at them, when that horrible realization finally sets in that they are no longer themselves, what are they going to do? Will they scream in horror? Or, and honestly this is far more terrifying, will they simply smile back at the mirror with the calm, agreeable, perfectly justified elegance of the scholar?
Something to think about, right?
Thank you all so much for joining me in this explainer today. Keep writing, keep world building, and whatever you do, keep questioning the reality of your worlds. See you next time.